Naomi Carter stares down the barrel of Officer Wilson's gun, her FBI badge glinting in the moonlight. "Federal agent, lower your weapon," she commands, her voice steady despite the terror. His finger tightens on the trigger. Their standoff will change America forever. Now, before we dive into this incredible story of courage and justice, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and if this kind of true crime story interests you, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of brave individuals standing up against injustice. Now, let's get into how Naomi Carter's ordinary visit home turned into a national movement for change. Naomi Carter hadn't expected danger when she returned to Oakwood Heights, Detroit, the neighborhood where she'd climbed trees and learned to ride a bike 30 years earlier. Now, at 34, the decorated FBI agent specializing in civil rights violations had returned for what should have been a simple visit to her ailing grandmother Eloise, whose heart condition had worsened over recent months. The once familiar streets felt different now. After 10 years away, more businesses boarded up, fewer children playing outdoors, and a heavier police presence than she remembered. Driving her unmarked government sedan down Maple Avenue at 11:37 at night, Naomi noticed headlights that had followed her for 6 blocks, keeping a consistent distance. She checked her rearview mirror and recognized the distinctive shape of a police cruiser. Her professional instincts kicked in. She wasn't speeding, her taillight wasn't out, and she'd made no traffic violations. Yet the cruiser suddenly flashed its lights, signaling her to pull over. Naomi complied immediately, pulling to the curb under a flickering streetlight. She took a deep breath and placed both hands on the steering wheel, where they would be visible, a habit ingrained from both her FBI training and her father's warnings about police interactions. Through her side mirror, she watched a white officer approach, hand already resting on his holstered weapon, an immediate red flag signaling heightened aggression without cause. License and Registration Officer Jason Wilson demanded without greeting or identifying himself. His flashlight beam shined directly into her eyes, rather than at her hands or the vehicle interior, a tactic Naomi recognized as intentional disorientation. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Officer Naomi inquired, politely maintaining professional composure. Wilson's face hardened. "I don't have to explain myself to you. License and registration now, or step out of the vehicle." Naomi noticed his body camera wasn't activated, another warning sign. "I'm going to reach for my credentials now," she announced clearly, moving her right hand slowly toward her purse on the passenger seat. The movement triggered an immediate escalation. Wilson drew his weapon with alarming speed, aiming directly at her head. "Hands where I can see them." Now he shouted, his voice carrying through the quiet neighborhood. Several lights flicked on in nearby homes. "Officer, I'm a federal agent," Naomi stated calmly, freezing in position. "My credentials and service weapon are—" "Shut up, Wilson." Cut her off, his gun now pressed against the window. "You have a weapon. Exit the vehicle slowly with your hands up." Naomi complied, opening the door with her left hand while keeping her right hand visible. As she stepped out, Wilson grabbed her shoulder and roughly spun her against the car. "I'm FBI," she repeated firmly. "Special Agent Naomi Carter, Detroit Field Office. My credentials are in my purse, and my service weapon is holstered at my right hip." Wilson ignored her, attempting to handcuff her while keeping his gun aimed. The commotion had drawn attention, curtains parted in nearby houses, and several residents had emerged onto their porches. Mrs. Jackson from across the street recognized her immediately. "That's Eleanor's granddaughter. She's FBI," the elderly woman called out. Something in Wilson's expression changed, not retreat but a hardening of purpose. He suddenly stepped back, keeping his weapon trained on Naomi. "Turn around slowly and show me this alleged badge," he demanded, emphasis on alleged, dripping with skepticism. Naomi turned, now facing Wilson directly, with the streetlight illuminating both of them. "My credentials are in my purse in the passenger seat. I'm going to retrieve them now." Wilson's finger visibly tightened on the trigger, a motion Naomi's trained eye caught immediately. "Don't move," he growled, a look of barely contained rage distorting his features. In that moment, Naomi realized this was no routine traffic stop gone wrong. The hatred in Wilson's eyes told her everything. He'd targeted her car deliberately, and her identification as federal law enforcement hadn't deterred him. It had enraged him. Time slowed, as Naomi faced a life-or-death decision with Wilson's finger tensing on the trigger, despite her FBI badge now clearly visible in her hand. In the fraction of a second that stretched between Wilson's tightening trigger finger and whatever would come next, Naomi made the decision that would alter both their lives forever. She drew her service weapon in one fluid, practiced motion, assuming a perfect firing stance that mirrored Wilson's own. "Federal agent, lower your weapon or I will fire," she commanded, her voice carrying the full authority of her position and training. The standoff froze time itself, creating a tableau illuminated by the cruiser's headlights and the flickering street lamp. A black woman in plain clothes and a white officer in uniform guns pointed at each other's hearts, while neighbors watched in horror. In that suspended moment, memories flashed through. Naomi's mind being 12 years old, sitting in the back seat of her father's car, when police pulled them over on this very street. How they dragged her father out of the car without explanation, pressed him against the hood, and zip-tied his hands while she watched terrified and confused. How they'd found drugs in the vehicle that her father, a high school math teacher and deacon at their church, had never possessed. How no one believed him until a neighbor's security camera footage emerged weeks later showing officers planting evidence. The charges were eventually dropped, but the trauma remained. Her father never drove after dark again, and Naomi had found her calling. "I'll make it right from the inside," she had promised him before leaving for Quantico. Now, 22 years later, she faced the same systemic injustice she'd dedicated her life to fighting. Wilson's expression registered shock that quickly morphed to outrage at her defiance. "Drop your weapon, police officer," he shouted, seemingly forgetting she'd already identified herself as FBI. Their standoff continued for 12 agonizing seconds until the wail of approaching sirens announced backup. 3 patrol cars screeched to a halt, and 5 additional officers emerged with weapons drawn, all aimed at Naomi, despite her clearly displayed badge. "FBI Special Agent Naomi Carter," she announced again, maintaining her stance while addressing the senior officer who appeared to be in charge. "This officer pulled me over without cause, refused to acknowledge my federal credentials, and is currently threatening a federal agent in performance of her duties. I need someone to verify my identity immediately." The sergeant, a heavy-set man with graying hair, whose nameplate read Donovan, approached cautiously. "Lower your weapon, ma'am, and we can sort this out." Not until Officer Wilson lowers his first, Naomi countered her training, preventing her from surrendering tactical advantage to someone who had already demonstrated clear intent to harm. "I've identified myself multiple times as federal law enforcement." A tense negotiation ensued with Sergeant Donovan, eventually persuading Wilson to lower his weapon slightly, while Naomi kept hers raised but redirected toward the ground, a compromise that allowed Donovan to approach and examine her credentials. After a radio verification with FBI dispatch confirmed her identity, Donovan ordered the other officers to stand down. All complied, except Wilson, who maintained his aggressive stance. "She pulled a gun on an officer," he insisted, voice shaking with barely controlled rage, "during a routine traffic stop. After you drew on me without cause and threatened to shoot despite clear identification as federal law enforcement." Naomi corrected her composure intact, despite adrenaline coursing through her system. "Lower your weapon," Wilson, Donovan ordered. "She's confirmed FBI." Wilson finally complied, holstering his weapon with obvious reluctance before leaning in toward Naomi. "You people think a badge changes anything," he whispered, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Remember where you are. This is my territory." The threat chilled her more than the gun had. Donovan apologized for the misunderstanding and offered to escort Naomi to her grandmother's house, which she declined. As the officers dispersed and neighbors slowly returned to their homes, Naomi sat in her car, hands shaking as delayed shock set in. She checked her phone to find 17 texts and calls. Her confrontation had been recorded by multiple neighbors and was already circulating online. The decision she now faced seemed equally weighted with consequence: file an official complaint against Wilson and potentially derail her career advancement, with a lengthy investigation and backlash from law enforcement communities nationwide. or let another incident of racial profiling fade into statistics. Remembering her father's face, the night of his wrongful arrest, and thinking of her grandmother who had marched with Dr. Welv King in the 60s, Naomi knew she couldn't walk away. She wouldn't file an official complaint yet, not until she gathered more information. Instead, she documented everything while the details remained fresh, creating an encrypted file on her secure FBI laptop and sending a private message to her partner back in Washington. Only then did she drive the remaining 6 blocks to her grandmother's house, hyper-aware of every patrol car that passed, as she contemplated what Wilson's whispered threat might mean for her extended stay in Oakwood Heights. What happens when a trained investigator becomes the target of systemic racism? How deep do the roots of corruption extend in a police department that operates with impunity? Naomi was about to discover exactly how dangerous asking these questions could be. Her planned 3-day visit to Detroit stretched into a week as she contacted her supervisor at the FBI field office in Washington, D.C., requesting extended leave for family medical reasons, technically true as her grandmother's perception. Condition required attention, but not the complete story. From her grandmother's dining room table, transformed into an improvised investigation center, Naomi began pulling threads on Officer Jason Wilson's career. Using her federal database access, she uncovered troubling patterns: 37 excessive force complaints in 15 years, all against Black or Latino citizens, all mysteriously dismissed or marked unfounded despite witness statements, and in some cases physical evidence. Even more disturbing were the gaps in Wilson's record periods of missing performance reviews and sudden transfers between departments without explanation. "Grandma, did you ever have run-ins with an officer Wilson?" Naomi asked over breakfast on her 3rd morning of research. Eleanor Carter, still regal at 78 despite her oxygen tank and medication regimen, set down her teacup with deliberate care. "That devil, everyone in Oakwood knows to avoid him. He's why the Jenkins family moved away last year after 3 generations on Monroe Street. Their boy Darius kept getting stopped, searched, roughed up 4 times in 1 month. The 5th time, Wilson fractured his wrist. The department claimed Darius fell while resisting arrest. Naomi's grandmother introduced her to community elders who shared story after story incidents that never made official records because complaints disappeared or victims were intimidated into silence. Pastor Wallace from Bethel, AME, Church showed her a logbook he'd kept for years, documenting parishioners' encounters with police. Wilson's name appeared 73 times associated with 2 deaths in custody ruled accidental despite witness accounts suggesting otherwise. The pattern extended beyond Wilson. Using facial recognition software on her secure laptop, Naomi identified him in departmental photos from 2 previous cities, Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and Frampton, Ohio, each showing him departing shortly after suspicious incidents involving Black residents. In Frampton, a civil rights lawsuit had been filed but dropped when the plaintiff mysteriously refused to testify. Naomi's investigation didn't go unnoticed. 3 days into her stay, her grandmother's longtime friend Marcus had been pulled over twice in 1 day for rolling stops at intersections. Her cousin Janelle was cited for noise violation at her daughter's birthday party in the middle of the afternoon. When Naomi herself ventured out for groceries, she noticed patrol cars circling the block officers, watching her movements with undisguised interest. Returning to her grandmother's house after interviewing a former officer who'd worked with Wilson, Naomi found Leroy Jenkins, the custodian at police headquarters, waiting nervously on the porch. "Miss Carter, I can't stay long," he whispered after her grandmother invited him in for tea. "You asking questions about Wilson has people nervous. There's a group they call themselves The Shield. Wilson's part of it. They protect each other, make problems disappear." He slipped her a folded paper with names hastily scribbled inside before hurrying away, refusing further explanation. That evening, Police Chief Thomas Blackwell called. Naomi remembered him from childhood. He'd been her father's poker buddy before rising through departmental ranks. "Naomi, it's been too long. How about coffee tomorrow? Just to catch up." His tone suggested casual reunion, but the timing revealed his true purpose. At the diner the following morning, Blackwell reminisced about neighborhood history for 20 minutes before finally addressing the present. "I heard about the unfortunate incident with Officer Wilson. A misunderstanding, clearly. But I understand you've been asking questions around town." His smile remained fixed as he stirred a third sugar into his coffee. "Just reconnecting with old neighbors," Naomi replied carefully. "Interesting how many have stories about police encounters." "Every department has complaint issues," Blackwell shrugged. "Nature of the job. But digging into personnel matters while on vacation that could complicate things. For everyone." The warning was gentler than Wilson's, but no less clear. Blackwell's seemingly friendly advice to enjoy family time and leave work behind carried unmistakable subtext: stop investigating or face consequences. Returning to her grandmother's house that afternoon, Naomi discovered exactly what those consequences might entail. Her rental car's windows were shattered, a racial slur keyed into the paint. On her grandmother's pristine white porch lay a dead crow, its neck broken, a warning as old as Jim Crow himself. Do you believe Naomi should back down from her investigation after these intimidation tactics, or should she push harder to expose the truth? Comment number 1. If you think she should protect herself and her family by backing off, or number 1. 2. If you believe justice requires her to continue despite the risks. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed or experienced racial profiling. This story might be fiction, but the reality it portrays happens daily across America. Make sure you're subscribed, because you won't want to miss what happens next as Naomi decides whether to retreat or retaliate. How far will the corruption in this police department extend? Will Naomi find allies in her dangerous investigation, or is she completely alone against a system designed to protect its own? Let's find out. The dead crow's message couldn't have been clearer. Naomi was being watched, warned, threatened. But intimidation tactics that might frighten ordinary citizens produced the opposite effect in an FBI agent specializing in civil rights violations. The next morning, she walked into the offices of the Detroit Tribune, requesting veteran investigative journalist Maya Richardson by name. The receptionist's eyes widened in recognition. Naomi's confrontation with Wilson had gained traction on social media, though mainstream outlets hadn't yet connected the viral video to her growing investigation. Special Agent Carter Maya greeted her cautiously in a conference room recorder conspicuously off. At 42, Maya had built her reputation exposing corruption in city government, including a series on police misconduct that had won regional journalism awards but earned her banned status at departmental press conferences. "I'm not here, officially," Naomi clarified, sliding a folder across the table. "Just a concerned citizen sharing public records with a journalist." Maya skimmed the documents, complaint statistics, transfer records incident, reports, her expression shifting from professional interest to personal investment. "I've been trying to piece this together for 3 years, she admitted. "Sources keep disappearing, evidence vanishes, witnesses recant. The department's Internal Affairs Division might as well be a protection racket." She hesitated, studying Naomi carefully. "Why trust me? Most feds consider journalists the enemy." "I read your piece on the Henderson shooting. You were the only reporter who questioned the official narrative when everyone accepted the gun-planted retroactively theory." Naomi held her gaze. "And I'm not here as FBI. I'm here as someone who grew up in Oakwood Heights and came back to find it terrorized by the people sworn to protect it." Their alliance formed cautiously built on shared purpose rather than immediate trust. Maya connected Naomi to attorney Elijah Montgomery, whose civil rights practice had filed 11 unsuccessful brutality lawsuits against the department. "They're remarkably effective at closing ranks," Montgomery explained in his modest office that evening, walls lined with civil rights movement photographs. "Cases disappear. Evidence gets contaminated. Witnesses receive visits from officers offering public safety advice that sounds remarkably like threats." His paralegal Catherine brought in a case file 3 inches thick. "This is everything we've gathered on what we call pattern incidents in Oakwood Heights and surrounding neighborhoods, traffic stops, home searches, public confrontations, all targeting black residents, most involving the same rotating group of officers." Naomi recognized Wilson's name appearing repeatedly alongside 6 others who formed a clear pattern. That night she encrypted and sent her growing evidence file to Special Agent Marcus Washington, her partner in the FBI's Civil Rights Division. His response came within hours. Preliminary database search shows similar complaint patterns against Wilson in previous jurisdictions. Possible connection to officer networks with white supremacist affiliations. Need more evidence? Watch your back. The warning proved prescient. The following afternoon, while purchasing medical supplies for her grandmother at Westside Pharmacy, Naomi noticed 2 patrol officers following her through aisles. As she approached the checkout, they blocked her path. "Ma'am, we've received reports of suspicious behavior," the younger officer announced loudly enough for other customers to hear. "Need to see some identification." On what grounds, Naomi questioned, aware of smartphones already recording the interaction. Suspicious behavior is not reasonable suspicion of a crime. The older officer moved his hand to his weapon. Store security reported possible shoplifting. Cooperate or face arrest. The humiliation was deliberate, a public spectacle designed to diminish her. Naomi produced her driver's license rather than FBI credentials, unwilling to escalate the confrontation in a crowded store. The officers made a show of examining it, radioing in her information while customers watched. After 10 excruciating minutes, a Lieutenant Naomi hadn't previously encountered arrived immediately, recognizing her. "Officers, stand down," he ordered quietly. "Miss Carter, apologies for the confusion. You're free to go." As the officers retreated, Naomi noticed something she'd missed during their initial confrontation, a small tattoo partially visible beneath Wilson's partner's uniform sleeve. A distinctive symbol resembling a shield with a sword. The same symbol she'd glimpsed on Wilson's wrist during their standoff. Marcus's response to her description was immediate possible connection to the Guardian's unofficial network of officers across multiple departments. Originated in Border Patrol and rural sheriff's offices, spread to urban departments. White supremacist ties, though they claim. Heritage protection. Highly organized, extremely dangerous. The stakes escalated dramatically the following day. Naomi's grandmother, returning from a doctor's appointment with her home health nurse, found 6 police vehicles surrounding her house. Police search warrant, an officer informed them coldly. Received an anonymous tip about drug activity at this address. The search lasted 2 hours, leaving the immaculate house in disarray, drawers, emptied furniture moved, family photos smashed. They found nothing, of course, but the message was clear. The stress triggered Eleanor's heart condition, requiring emergency medication and a terrified night monitoring her vital signs. The community's response proved unexpected. Neighbors arrived throughout the evening, Mrs. Washington bringing dinner, Pastor Wallace organizing prayer circles on the porch, teenagers from the block taking shifts watching the house overnight. By morning, Naomi had 27 new statements from residents describing similar intimidation tactics. Maya's preliminary article appeared online that afternoon, carefully worded to avoid libel claims, while raising questions about concerning patterns in police interactions in specific neighborhoods. Within hours, Maya called with a new development. Someone inside the department reached out after seeing my article, says they have evidence about an organized group within the force targeting specific neighborhoods. Wants to meet. The meeting with Internal Affairs Officer Zoe Martinez occurred in the basement of Trinity Lutheran Church. Martinez, a 15-year veteran assigned to Internal Affairs for 3 years, brought a flash drive containing body cam footage systematically deleted from official servers, but backed up on her private security system. "They call themselves the Guardians of Heritage," Martinez explained, voice barely above a whisper. Started as an informal club 5 years ago, now controls promotions, assignments, complaint investigations. Wilson's one of their lieutenants. Chief Blackwell knows, but looks the other way. His retirement pension depends on their political connections. The footage showed officers, including Wilson, discussing neighborhood cleansing operations and demographic maintenance euphemisms for targeted harassment of black residents. Most disturbing was a meeting where Wilson and others discussed using real estate developers to accelerate transition in Oakwood Heights. Naomi forwarded everything to Marcus, who responded with alarming news: symbol identified on database of extremist organizations. guardians connected to similar groups in 27 departments nationwide. This is bigger than Wilson, it's systemic. Regional Director authorizing preliminary investigation resources. That night, returning from another community meeting gathering testimonies, Naomi found her grandmother's house surrounded by neighbors, forming a protective cordon. Someone left this on the porch, Pastor Wallace explained, handing her a sealed envelope. Inside was a single photograph, Naomi entering the Detroit Tribune building with a red X drawn across her face. The threat couldn't have been clearer, but neither could Naomi's resolve. The intimidation tactics that had silenced others for years had instead created something Oakwood Heights hadn't seen in decades. A united community ready to fight back, centered around an FBI agent who now understood that her neighborhood had become ground zero in a national crisis of racist policing that extended far beyond one officer with a gun. The transition from personal investigation to official FBI case happened at 5:43 the following morning when Naomi's secure phone rang, displaying her supervisor, Director Sharon Coleman's number. "Carter, I'm looking at the files you sent Washington. Regional Director Matthews has authorized preliminary investigative resources under civil rights statute violations. You're officially lead agent effective immediately." The validation should have felt like victory, but Naomi recognized the careful phrasing preliminary resources meant limited support. Civil rights statute violations rather than domestic terrorism investigation indicated political caution. Lead agent meant responsibility without guaranteed backup. Permission to recruit Washington as on-site support, Naomi requested, knowing the delicate territory she was entering. An uncomfortable pause followed. "There's resistance from several quarters," Coleman admitted. Deputy Director Alvarez suggests using local Detroit field office resources instead. Translation: powerful figures within the Bureau wanted to contain this investigation, minimize its scope, keep it local and manageable. With respect, Director, the Detroit office has jurisdictional overlap with potentially compromised departments. Washington and I have specialized civil rights violation experience and no local entanglements. Another pause. 48 hours with Washington. Preliminary evidence gathering only. If substantive findings emerge, we'll reassess resource allocation. Small victory secured. Naomi immediately established a secure operations center in her grandmother's converted garage, installing surveillance countermeasures and encrypted communication equipment from the Detroit field office. Marcus Washington arrived 7 hours later, bringing additional technical resources and the grounding presence of a partner she'd worked with for 6 years. "They're nervous upstairs," he confirmed, setting up a satellite uplink. Civil rights investigations targeting police departments are politically volatile in normal circumstances. Add in potential white supremacist organizational structures operating across jurisdictional lines, and the Bureau gets twitchy. Their first official interview as FBI rather than concerned citizens was with Internal Affairs Officer Martinez, now formally classified as a confidential informant. Martinez brought organizational charts, internal communications, and patrol assignment patterns, showing systematic targeting of minority neighborhoods. The Guardians operate as a shadow command structure, she explained, visibly nervous even in the secure setting. Officially, Wilson is just a patrol officer, but Guardian members follow his directives regardless of rank. Chief Blackwell claimed he was investigating when I brought him evidence 3 years ago. 2 weeks later, my apartment was broken into, case files stolen, and a dead rat left on my bed. Message received. The department's corruption extended beyond harassment into financial territories. Attorney Montgomery arrived with property records showing suspicious patterns. Oakwood Heights properties seized through civil forfeiture or abandoned after owner harassment mysteriously ended up purchased by shell companies linked to the Platered Plaisance, to the police union's investment fund, and certain city council members. They're systematically driving out black homeowners to flip properties during gentrification, Montgomery explained. Last year alone, property values jumped 37%, after targeted enforcement reduced black ownership below 50%. Naomi's official investigation triggered immediate pushback. An anonymous ethics complaint appeared in her FBI personnel file, alleging unprofessional conduct and conflict of interest. The Detroit Police Officers Association issued a public statement condemning federal overreach and anti-police bias. Chief Blackwell, abandoning his previous friendly demeanor, held a press conference declaring outside agitators are undermining community trust in law enforcement. Most concerning was the surveillance unmarked vehicles following her grandmother's caregivers, suspicious service interruptions on their secured communications, unusual electronic interference suggesting listening devices. Washington detected and neutralized 3 separate bugs hidden in Eleanor's living room behind picture frames. The community rallied around them, neighbors creating informal security patrols, local businesses offering safe meeting spaces, residents coming forward with years of documented harassment. Maya's follow-up article, now supported by official FBI investigation, generated national media attention. The pressure intensified professional consequences for both agents. Washington received a midnight call from his former academy classmate, now working in the director's office. They're discussing reassigning you both. Powerful voices want this contained. Senator Hargrove from the Intelligence Committee made calls questioning resource allocation. Watch your backs. Naomi understood the subtext. Their investigation threatened not just local officers, but potentially reached into political power structures. The tipping point came when Naomi received an unexpected encrypted message from Officer Martinez' urgent meeting. New evidence connects Guardians to national network. Police headquarters server restricted access files. They arranged to meet at Trinity Lutheran's basement, their established secure location. Martinez never arrived. After 45 minutes, Naomi received a text from an unknown number accident at Martinez's residence. Medical emergency. Racing to Martinez's apartment building across town, they found the door ajar. The interior ransacked furniture, overturned papers, scattered laptop missing. Most alarming was the small bloodstain on the kitchen floor, and Martinez's service weapon abandoned beneath the table. Naomi immediately classified Martinez as a missing person connected to an ongoing federal investigation, officially elevating the case priority and forcing resource allocation despite resistance from above. This isn't about one racist cop anymore, Washington observed grimly as they processed the scene. This is organized criminal activity operating under color of law. Their investigation had crossed the invisible line from troubling to dangerous, no longer just career-threatening, but life-threatening. As they established a search operation for Martinez, Naomi's phone chimed with a message from Maya Wilson, "Just pulled over my car. Said to tell you accidents happen to nosy bitches. Thought you should know." The personal vendetta had expanded beyond Naomi to anyone connected to the investigation. That night, as Naomi moved her grandmother to a secure FBI safe house, accompanied by round-the-clock medical personnel, Eleanor grasped her hand with surprising strength. "Your grandfather faced down night riders in Mississippi before I was born," she whispered. "Said there's a difference between being afraid and being stopped by fear. Feel the fear, baby girl, then do what needs doing anyway." The next morning, reviewing Martinez's partial case files, they discovered something unexpected, a connection between Wilson's Guardian Group and a private security firm called Heritage Protective Services, which employed multiple former officers previously fired for misconduct. The firm received city contracts for supplemental neighborhood security in gentrifying areas, essentially privatizing the harassment tactics. Following this money trail led to offshore accounts, political campaign contributions, and property development corporations. They were no longer investigating isolated incidents of racism, but a sophisticated criminal enterprise using policing as cover for territorial economic control. Their time was running out in multiple ways. The 48-hour authorization window from FBI headquarters closing Martinez, still missing, and surveillance of their operation intensifying. "We need something definitive," Washington stressed. "Something that breaks this wide open before they shut us down." The breakthrough came unexpectedly when Wilson's former patrol partner, Officer Samuel Reynolds, contacted them through Maya. "I can't live with it anymore," he confessed in a secured interview room. "The things I've seen, things I was part of. Wilson has recordings, meetings where they plan which families to target, which properties to focus on, evidence of everything. He keeps it in a storage facility as insurance against the others turning on him. Reynolds provided the location along with access codes, offering to testify despite obvious terror. "They'll kill me for this," he whispered, hands shaking uncontrollably. "But Martinez was good to me when nobody else was, if they've hurt her." Naomi and Washington now face their most crucial decision: wait for warrant clearance through increasingly resistant FBI channels, potentially losing their window of opportunity and endangering Martinez further, or act immediately on Reynolds' information despite potential procedural violations that could compromise their case. The sun was setting as they parked 3 blocks from the storage facility. Weapons checked backup communications, established aware they were potentially walking into a trap, but equally certain that somewhere in that facility, Officer Martinez's life hung in the balance, along with evidence that could expose a nationwide network of corruption that had terrorized communities like Oakwood Heights for decades. How far would you go to expose a truth that powerful forces want hidden? What would you risk to save a colleague whose only crime was integrity? These questions weren't theoretical for Naomi and Washington as they approached the storage facility, under cover of darkness, operating in the gray area between procedural correctness and moral necessity. Would you cross that line if lives were at stake? Comment number 1. If you believe following proper channels matters most even when the system seems corrupted, or number 2, if you think justice sometimes requires breaking protocol. Drop a like if you're shocked by how organized this conspiracy has become, and subscribe to see how this dangerous raid unfolds. The storage facility sat isolated at the edge of an industrial park surrounded by chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Security cameras mounted at corners created blind spots Reynolds had identified during his tearful confession. Wilson paranoid, he'd explained. Don't trust facility security. Installed own cameras, but left gaps. They moved through these gaps with practiced efficiency, Washington disabling the padlock with specialized tools, while Naomi maintained perimeter awareness. Unit 17 appeared identical to others. Rolling metal door, commercial-grade lock, but Reynolds had warned it contained sophisticated security. Booby-trapped, he'd whispered. Shotgun shell rigged to door. Disarm before entry. Washington located the crude but effective mechanism within minutes, fishing line connecting the door to a modified trigger assembly. Amateur but deadly, he murmured carefully, disabling it. Definitely not department-issued knowledge. The unit's interior revealed Wilson's twisted thoroughness walls covered with maps marking targeted homes and red surveillance photos of community activists, including Pastor Wallace, and most disturbing a detailed diagram of Eleanor Carter's house with entry points highlighted. Filing cabinets contained decades of records, complaints, buried officers transferred, rather than disciplined witnesses intimidated. A laptop connected to an external hard drive held encrypted files. Washington immediately began copying to secure FBI storage. Naomi discovered a hidden compartment beneath the floor containing firearms, with serial numbers filed off police-issue tasers, unreported as missing, and Ziploc bags of substances suspiciously similar to narcotics used for planting. Evidence. They photographed everything, systematically establishing unbroken evidence chains despite their unorthodox access. Nothing, however, indicated Martinez's location. Washington Naomi called, softly examining a bulletin board partially hidden behind storage boxes. Look at this. The board displayed photographs of abandoned properties throughout Detroit, each marked with acquisition dates and developer names. Notes in Wilson's handwriting detailed acceleration strategies, broken windows, anonymous crime reports, selective enforcement. At the center, a larger map showed Oakwood Heights with properties color-coded by owner demographics and arrows, indicating desired transition direction. Most revealing was a printed email correspondence between Wilson and Urban Renewal Partners, LLC, discussing preparation activities prior to mass property acquisition. Their engineering neighborhood declined to buy property cheaply before development projects are publicly announced. Washington realized photographing everything. Classic blockbusting with a modern twist. The final discovery came as they prepared to leave a locked metal briefcase hidden inside an air conditioning vent. Inside lay folders labeled Insurance containing photographs and recordings of meetings between Wilson Chief Blackwell and several individuals identified in captions as city council members, real estate developers, and most damning assistant porters, District Attorney Gregory Mitchell. Transcripts detailed explicit discussions of targeting specific demographic undesirables to prepare neighborhoods for redevelopment. One document referenced Storage Site B, with an address in Riverside Industrial Park. That's where they're holding Martinez. Naomi concluded, checking her watch. We've got 83 minutes before shift change at that location according to these guard schedules. They secured the evidence and resealed the unit, leaving surveillance equipment hidden to monitor future access. 27 minutes later, they approached a seemingly abandoned warehouse in Riverside Industrial Park. Thermal imaging showed 3 heat signatures inside, 2 moving periodically, 1 stationary. 2 guards, 1 detainee. Washington whispered as they observed from cover. Standard 2-man rotation for informal detention. They formulated a non-lethal approach plan, Washington, creating a distraction at the rear entrance, while Naomi accessed the main floor through a loading dock with partially broken security features. The interior revealed the warehouse's true purpose, a guardian safehouse used for interrogations outside official channels. Soundproofed rooms lined one wall. A makeshift briefing area occupied another, and weapons unauthorized for police use filled locked cabinets, Washington quickly documented. Following the stationary heat signature, Naomi located Martinez in a back room, handcuffed to a pipe, visibly injured but alive. "Took you long enough," Martinez whispered through split lips when Naomi appeared. "They've got everything, my files, my backup drives. Wilson knows about the investigation. We know," Naomi confirmed, working on the handcuffs. "Washington securing the perimeter while I get you out." The rescue plan collapsed when vehicle headlights swept the warehouse windows. Wilson had arrived with 4 officers, all wearing regular uniforms but displaying small Guardian insignia pins. Naomi and Washington retreated to defensive positions, ensuring Martinez's protection while maintaining tactical advantage. The confrontation became inevitable when Wilson detected signs of intrusion. Federal agents, Naomi announced as Wilson's group entered the detention area with weapons drawn. "Lower your weapons and stand down." The standoff mirrored their first encounter, but with roles dramatically reversed, Naomi now had legal authority, backup, and overwhelming evidence. Wilson's response revealed a man beyond rational calculation. "You think a federal badge changes the natural order," he snarled, gesturing for his officers to spread out. "You're still what you've always been, an intruder where you don't belong." His subsequent monologue exposed the full ideology behind the Guardian Network beliefs about racial territory, demographic protection, and heritage preservation, flowing uncensored, apparently unconcerned about witnesses. "We've done this across 20 cities, he boasted, returning neighborhoods to their proper demographic balance. Your people move in, property values drop, crime rises. We simply accelerate nature's course, then rebuild properly afterward." Washington activated his concealed recording device as Wilson detailed operations implicated co-conspirators and confirmed Martinez's allegations. When Wilson finally noticed Washington's subtle movement, his expression shifted from righteous confidence to cornered rage. "Take them," he ordered his officers. "No witnesses, no bodies. Industrial accident in an abandoned building." The firefight erupted without warning, Wilson firing first toward Martinez, forcing Naomi to return fire. Washington engaged the flanking officers, wounding one in the shoulder while maintaining cover. Wilson retreated behind steel shelving, firing wildly as his officers realized the magnitude of their situation, participating in assault on federal agents. "Wilson, stop! They're FBI!" one shouted, lowering his weapon. "We didn't sign up for this." Another officer followed suit, placing his gun on the ground and raising his hands. Wilson responded by turning his weapon toward the traitor, allowing Naomi a clear opportunity to disable him with a non-lethal shot to the thigh. As Wilson collapsed, sirens announced the arrival of FBI tactical teams Washington had silently summoned when the confrontation began. The warehouse, transformed from secretive Guardian stronghold to active federal crime scene within minutes. Evidence technicians documenting everything, medical personnel, attending to Martinez, and the wounded agents securing suspects, including a still defiant Wilson. "You've just guaranteed race war," he spat as agents led him to a transport vehicle. "The Guardians have chapters everywhere. You can't stop demographic destiny." Naomi's response was measured, professional, and captured on official recordings. "What I've stopped is a criminal conspiracy operating under color of law. The only war here was your illegal war against American citizens based on their race." Within hours, the evidence secured from both locations triggered coordinated FBI operations across 3 states, search warrants executed on Guardian-connected officers, electronic records seized from precinct servers, financial accounts frozen. Chief Blackwell called emergency press conferences denouncing rogue officers acting without departmental knowledge while distancing himself from Wilson, a performance undermined by photographic evidence of their collaborative meetings. Naomi's grandmother watched news coverage from her safe house, nodding with grim satisfaction as Wilson's mugshot appeared on screen. "Your grandfather would be proud," she told Naomi during a secure call. "This is what justice work looks like." The warehouse raid represented victory, but illuminated the investigation's true scope. Wilson's files confirmed Guardian chapters operating in 12 cities, with members in positions from patrol officers to captains connected through encrypted communications and regional coordinators. What had begun as Naomi's personal confrontation with a racist officer had exposed a nationwide conspiracy blending ideological hatred with financial opportunism, using policing powers to engineer neighborhood demographics for profit. As Martinez recovered in a guarded hospital room and Washington coordinated expanded investigation teams, Naomi received an unexpected call from FBI Director Chambers himself. "The Attorney General just authorized multi-jurisdictional task force resources," he informed her. "You're named acting commander for Operation Guardian Disclosure. Full investigative authority across state lines." The professional validation arrived simultaneously with personal threat. Wilson, despite detention in federal custody, somehow arranged for a final message delivered by an orderly at Martinez's hospital, a hand-drawn Guardian shield symbol with Naomi's name beneath it marked for elimination. The conspiracy was unraveling, but its defenders remained dangerous, possibly including figures in positions powerful enough to threaten even federal agents. Naomi placed the threat notice into evidence, straightened her jacket, and entered the tactical briefing room where 28 FBI agents awaited her instructions. The personal nightmare that began with a traffic stop had transformed into professional purpose with national implications. The rookie officer who'd once promised her father she'd change things from inside now stood at the center of the largest civil rights investigation in decades, leading the effort to dismantle a network that had terrorized communities like Oakwood Heights across America. 43 hours after Wilson's arrest, the Operational Command Center, established in the Detroit FBI field office, buzzed with coordinated activity as Naomi authorized simultaneous raids on Guardian-connected locations across Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Digital forensics teams worked through encrypted files recovered from Wilson's storage unit, while financial analysts traced property acquisition patterns through shell companies associated with Guardian members. Threat assessment specialists maintained security protocols for key witnesses, including Martinez, who had been transferred to an undisclosed medical facility under 24-hour protection. The evidence against Wilson and his immediate circle appeared overwhelming: illegal detention of Officer Martinez, conspiracy, civil rights violations, witness intimidation, unauthorized weapons possession. However, the broader Guardian network remained operational, despite initial disruption with encrypted communications indicating emergency protocols activated and evidence destruction underway at multiple locations. Their circling wagons, Washington observed, reviewing real-time surveillance feeds. Mid-level members deleting communications, senior figures establishing distance through cutouts and deniability structures. The pattern resembled organized crime more than rogue policing, hierarchical, compartmentalized, with leaders insulated from direct operational involvement. Most concerning were indications of Guardian sympathizers within federal agencies, potentially including the FBI itself. Security protocols within the investigation tightened accordingly, with information access strictly limited, even among task force members. Naomi's testimony before a special grand jury detailed Wilson's operation with methodical precision records of targeted harassment campaigns against 78 families in Oakwood Heights alone, coordinated with property acquisitions by development corporations linked to Guardian members through elaborate financial structures. The indictments came swiftly. Wilson and 14 officers on multiple federal charges, including conspiracy against rights, deprivation of rights under color of law, and witness tampering. Chief Blackwell faced lesser charges but potentially devastating evidence of knowledge and facilitation. Most significant was the indictment of Assistant District Attorney Mitchell for systematically dismissing cases against Guardian-affiliated officers while aggressively prosecuting residents from targeted neighborhoods. The Guardian Network's response proved unexpectedly sophisticated and multi-layered. Their legal defense team, funded through untraceable accounts, painted Wilson as a misunderstood public servant protecting communities from documented crime increases following demographic changes. Police unions across 3 states issued statements condemning federal overreach and anti-police bias, organizing blue line demonstrations outside FBI offices. Conservative media personalities questioned the investigation's timing and motivations, suggesting political rather than justice-oriented purposes. Most disturbing were the personal attacks articles examining Naomi's history for vulnerabilities, social media campaigns, questioning her professionalism, threatening messages sent to extended family members, and surveillance of her. Movements by unidentified individuals, despite security protocols. The case's complexity expanded when Attorney Montgomery identified potential constitutional claims against the entire Guardian operation. 14th Amendment, equal protection violations. 4th Amendment, unreasonable search abuses, and First Amendment retaliation against community activists who oppose their activities. This isn't just criminal prosecution, Montgomery explained during task force briefings. This represents potential civil rights impact litigation addressing systemic discrimination in policing nationwide. Public response divided predictably along racial and political lines. Black communities across targeted cities organized support rallies, while predominantly white neighborhoods displayed thin blue-line flags supporting officers under attack. Politicians carefully calibrated statements based on constituent demographics rather than evidence specifics. Maya's ongoing investigative series generated Pulitzer buzz alongside death threats requiring security protection. The pressure reached breaking point 14 days into full investigation when Wilson, despite restricted communications in federal detention, somehow orchestrated a coordinated intimidation campaign against key witnesses. Pastor Wallace's church suffered arson damage, with Guardian Justice spray-painted on remaining walls. Attorney Montgomery's office received packages containing surveillance photos of his children walking to school. Most alarming, Eleanor Carter's medical transport to a routine appointment was intercepted by individuals impersonating federal agents, the attempt thwarted only by rigorous authentication protocols Washington had established. The pattern suggested Wilson retained operational command despite incarceration, with supporters willing to escalate beyond intimidation to actual violence. He's forcing acceleration, Naomi concluded during emergency task force assessment, creating crisis to compromise witness testimony before trial. The assessment proved accurate when Officer Reynolds, their crucial insider witness, disappeared from protective custody during transport between secure locations. Surveillance footage showed his security detail diverted by an apparent traffic accident while unmarked vehicles surrounded the transport van. Reynolds' service weapon and credentials were later found abandoned in a restaurant bathroom 40 miles away, with blood evidence suggesting non-fatal injury but clear duress. Reynolds reappeared 3 days later, in a hastily called press conference accompanied by the police union attorney and visibly displaying facial bruising. Reading mechanically from prepared statements, he recanted all previous testimony, claiming Naomi had pressured and threatened him into false allegations against respected colleagues. His eyes, however, told a different story, darting fearfully toward individuals stationed at room exits, hands trembling as he denied coercion, while displaying classic signs of exactly that condition. The prosecution's central witness now compromised, Wilson's attorney filed emergency motions for dismissal, while Guardian-affiliated social media accounts trumpeted vindication. The case that had appeared unassailable suddenly balanced on precarious legal ground despite overwhelming documentary evidence. Director Chambers summoned Naomi to Washington for emergency consultation. Political pressures intensifying, he admitted, in his secure office. Senator Hargrove's committee questioning resource allocation. Justice Department receiving concerns about case viability. If Reynolds' testimony remains compromised, the implication hung unspoken powerful interests, wanted this investigation contained limited to Wilson's immediate circle rather than the nationwide network or its political protectors. Naomi's response was measured but unyielding. Sir Officer Martinez remains ready to testify despite intimidation. Documentary evidence establishes conspiracy independent of Reynolds' statements. Most importantly, witness intimidation itself constitutes additional federal offenses strengthening our overall case. She placed before him a detailed operational proposal. With your authorization, we can initiate simultaneous arrests of 37 Guardian members across 7 jurisdictions based on existing evidence, potentially securing additional cooperating witnesses through appropriate plea arrangements. Chambers studied the document silently before looking up with grim determination. Authorized with one modification. I want you personally supervising Wilson's extended questioning. If anyone can break through his ideological framework to secure cooperation, it's the agent he most despises. The confrontation occurred in a maximum security interview room at the Federal Detention Center, Wilson handcuffed to the table. Despite his leg injury, Naomi seated opposite with case files organized precisely before her. His opening sneer dissolved as she methodically presented evidence. Even he hadn't realized. Existed surveillance photographs, documenting meetings he believed, unobserved financial records tracing Guardian funds through supposedly untraceable accounts, testimony from members already negotiating cooperation agreements. Wilson's expression shifted from contempt to calculation to something approaching respect for a worthy opponent. You're more thorough than I expected, he finally acknowledged. But you're fighting a losing battle against nature itself. Demographics don't lie. Integration destroys property values. We're simply managing inevitable urban decay. Naomi maintained professional demeanor while systematically dismantling his justifications. Property values declined because banks redlined these neighborhoods, denying loans and maintenance capital based purely on racial composition. Your urban decay was engineered through discriminatory investment patterns, not resident behavior. For 6 hours, their confrontation continued, Wilson defending increasingly indefensible positions, while Naomi presented counter-evidence, gradually narrowing his options toward cooperation. The breakthrough came unexpectedly when she placed before him photographs of Guardian leaders at luxury resorts purchased with funds diverted from police union accounts. They're living extremely well, while you face life imprisonment for executing their agenda, she observed neutrally. Loyalty should be reciprocal, don't you think? Something shifted in Wilson's expression, the first crack in his ideological armor. By interview's end, he hadn't agreed to cooperate, but requested time to consider options rather than maintaining blanket denials. The simultaneous raids proceeded at dawn the following day, 37 locations across 7 cities, yielding 29 arrests, thousands of documents and digital evidence, confirming the Guardian Network's operational structure, membership, and activities spanning 15 years. Most significant was material recovered from a Guardian leader's home-safe written directives from political figures, encouraging demographic management in specific voting districts to maintain electoral advantages, essentially. Weaponizing police power for partisan purposes. The conspiracy's true dimensions now extended beyond racist policing into attacks on democratic processes themselves. As evidence mounted and additional Guardian members sought cooperation agreements, public opinion shifted accordingly. Maya's comprehensive reporting earned national attention, while community organizations in affected neighborhoods formed coalitions demanding accountability beyond criminal prosecution, policy changes, oversight mechanisms, and reparative justice for targeted communities. Unexpected support emerged from police reform advocates within law enforcement itself, officers tired of Guardian influence, damaging legitimate policing. The turning point in public narrative came when Officer Martinez, still recovering from injuries, gave televised testimony before a congressional oversight committee, describing in precise detail the Guardian operations, their targeting methodologies, and the systematic suppression of internal accountability. Her professional demeanor and obvious courage transformed her into a reluctant national symbol of integrity against corruption. Wilson, watching from detention as former colleagues negotiated reduced sentences through cooperation and political supporters, distanced themselves from the growing scandal, finally made his decision. Through his attorney, he requested a meeting with federal prosecutors, offering full cooperation regarding Guardian national leadership structure in exchange for sentencing considerations. The conspiracy that had terrorized communities like Oakwood Heights for decades was unraveling from within its members, turning against each other as the evidence mounted and public exposure intensified. Naomi, reviewing operational updates in the command center, received notification of Wilson's cooperation request with professional satisfaction rather than personal vindication. The case had never been about him individually, but the systemic abuses he represented abuses she had promised her father, her grandmother, and ultimately herself that she would confront from within the system. As the investigation expanded nationwide, with Guardian chapters identified in 27 cities and connections to political figures at multiple levels, Naomi prepared for the public phase of accountability, congressional testimony, judicial proceedings, and most importantly, structural reforms, addressing the conditions that had allowed such abuses to flourish unchecked for generations. Naomi stood absolutely still before the ornate wooden doors of the Rayburn House office building, mentally preparing for what awaited inside. 72 days had passed since her confrontation with Wilson, transforming a routine visit home into a nationwide federal investigation that had identified Guardian chapters in 34 cities across 17 states. Today's congressional testimony would publicly expose the full dimensions of their operation, for the first time connecting local harassment campaigns to nationwide patterns of discriminatory policing and political manipulation. Ready, Washington asked, quietly adjusting his precisely knotted tie. The House Oversight Committee hearing represented their most significant public presentation of evidence to date, televised, nationally attended by media from across political spectrum, with potential to shape policy discussions for, quote, years. Naomi nodded once, professional composure masking the emotional weight of the moment. Eleanor would want to be here, she said, referring to her grandmother, who had passed peacefully 3 weeks earlier, living just long enough to see Wilson and 14 officers indicted, but not their eventual conviction. She is Washington, assured her, tapping his chest above his heart. The hearing room hushed as they entered, committee members arranged on elevated platforms, media representatives crowding designated areas, public seating filled with community activists from affected neighborhoods nationwide. Naomi recognized Pastor Wallace and Attorney Montgomery, seated prominently alongside families whose testimonies had broken the case open. Maya Richardson nodded respectfully from the press section, her investigative series now expanded into an upcoming book detailing the Guardian conspiracy. Most surprising was the law enforcement contingent, dozens of officers in formal uniforms representing departments nationwide attending in solidarity with the investigation rather than with exposed colleagues. Their presence symbolized the case's evolution from exposing individual misconduct to addressing systemic failures enabling organized abuse. For 4 hours, Naomi presented evidence with methodical precision documentation of 327 targeted harassment campaigns against minority residents in gentrifying neighborhoods, property acquisition patterns showing Guardian-connected developers purchasing devalued homes, financial records, tracking millions flowing through police union accounts into private security firms, employing officers dismissed for misconduct. Most damning were the operational communications, Guardian leaders explicitly discussing demographic cleansing strategies, territorial reclamation targets, and racial balance restoration techniques that weaponized police authority against lawful residents based solely on race. Representative Daniels from Michigan's urban district leaned forward during questioning. Agent Carter, based on your investigation, would you characterize the Guardian network as primarily motivated by racial animus or financial opportunism? The question cut to the investigation's core complexity. Both elements were inseparable in operational practice. Congressman Naomi replied carefully. Racial targeting provided justification for actions that generated substantial financial benefits through property acquisition and development contracts. The ideology enabled the profiteering, while the profits funded further ideological activities. Neither would have sustained independently at this scale. The committee's questions continued exploring leadership structures, recruitment practices, oversight failures, and potential preventative measures for future situations. Throughout her testimony, Naomi maintained professional detachment, while ensuring human impacts remained central. Individual families terrorized from their homes, communities deliberately destabilized, constitutional protections systematically denied to targeted citizens. The Guardian conspiracy represents failure at multiple institutional levels, she concluded in her final statement. Law enforcement oversight mechanisms, prosecutorial independence, political accountability structures, and media scrutiny all proved initially inadequate against organized abuse operating within systems designed to protect citizens. Addressing these vulnerabilities requires structural reform rather than simply prosecuting individual participants. The congressional hearing represented one aspect of a multifaceted accountability process. Simultaneously, federal prosecution proceeded against 73 Guardian members across multiple jurisdictions, with Wilson himself now cooperating extensively in exchange for sentencing considerations. His testimony had proved unexpectedly valuable, detailing recruitment practices, financing mechanisms, and most critically political protection arrangements with figures in positions to block investigations or divert accountability. Civil litigation advanced under Attorney Montgomery's direction with class action suits seeking damages for affected families, alongside structural reform demands for departments that had harbored Guardian activities. Independent oversight commissions formed in 17 cities, while police academies nationwide implemented enhanced bias screening protocols and civil rights training modules developed with community input. Returning to Detroit after congressional testimony, Naomi faced the most personally significant aspect of the case's resolution, addressing the Oakwood Heights community directly. The town hall meeting occurred at Bethel AME Church, where Pastor Wallace had maintained his harassment documentation for years without official response. Every pew filled with residents whose experiences had fueled the investigation, families who had endured targeted traffic stops, business owners who had faced selective code enforcement, young men repeatedly searched without cause or warrant. The federal investigation has identified and charged those responsible for systematic civil rights violations in this community. Naomi began standing before the gathering without podium or formal structure. Criminal prosecutions continue with substantial evidence supporting convictions. Civil remedies are advancing through appropriate legal channels. However, accountability extends beyond courtrooms. She paused, setting aside her prepared remarks. I grew up 6 blocks from this church. My father taught mathematics at Oakwood High School for 27 years. My grandmother sold real estate here when banks refused mortgages to qualified black families. I understand that federal badges and indictments, while necessary, cannot themselves restore what was taken from this community: security, dignity, trust in institutions meant to protect all citizens equally. For the next hour, Naomi listened more than spoke, residents sharing experiences, expressing continued fears, despite Guardian members' removal, questioning whether systemic changes would outlast immediate accountability. Their skepticism reflected generations of promised reforms that had failed to deliver lasting transformation. "I cannot guarantee that removing the Guardian network will prevent all future discrimination," Naomi acknowledged honestly. "What I can promise is that this investigation has created documentation that cannot be ignored, established patterns that cannot be denied, and exposed mechanisms that cannot continue operating unchallenged. Most importantly, it has validated what this community always knew was happening despite official dismissals." The community meeting transitioned into implementation planning, establishing civilian oversight structures, creating direct communication channels with federal authorities, developing educational programs about constitutional rights during police encounters. Pastor Wallace's documentation system expanded into formal community monitoring protocols adopted by oversight committees nationwide. As the gathering concluded, Mrs. Jackson, the elderly neighbor who had first identified Naomi during her confrontation with Wilson, approached slowly with the assistance of her walker. "Your grandmother would be proud," she said, grasping Naomi's hand. "Eleanor always said you'd come back someday and help set things right." The personal validation meant more than congressional recognition or professional advancement resulting from the case. Leaving the church, Naomi encountered an unexpected figure waiting beside her vehicle. Officer Martinez, now recovered from injuries and recently appointed to lead Detroit's newly established Independent Police Accountability Commission. "Just wanted to say thank you in person," Martinez said simply, "for believing me when nobody else would." Their conversation continued over coffee at a nearby diner, once frequented by Naomi's father, discussing implementation challenges, resistance from entrenched interests, and strategies for sustaining reforms beyond immediate accountability. The Guardian network developed over decades, Martinez observed. Dismantling its effects will require similar commitment. Their discussion represented the case's transition from investigation to implementation, the lengthy, complex process of reforming systems that had enabled organized abuse to operate within institutional protections. Returning to her grandmother's house, now Naomi's property, following Eleanor's passing, she found Washington coordinating final case documentation with the expanded investigative team. "Wilson's sentencing hearing is scheduled for next Thursday," he informed her. "Prosecutors recommend 20 years, with possibility of reduction based on continued cooperation." 31 Guardian members have accepted plea agreements in exchange for testimony against leadership figures. The legal proceedings represented necessary accountability but insufficient resolution for communities that had endured decades of targeted harassment. True justice required structural reform alongside individual prosecution, addressing conditions that had allowed the Guardian network to develop rather than simply removing its current participants. That understanding guided the investigation's final phase, as it transitioned from exposing past abuses to preventing future recurrence. The reckoning extended beyond courtrooms into police academies, oversight structures, departmental policies, and community relationships, transforming an individual confrontation between a federal agent and local officer into a nationwide reassessment of how law enforcement power remained vulnerable to organized abuse despite existing accountability mechanisms. Most significantly, the case had validated experiences long dismissed by official narratives. Communities like Oakwood Heights finally receiving acknowledgement that their reports of systematic harassment represented genuine civil rights violations rather than isolated incidents or subjective perceptions. For Naomi personally, the investigation fulfilled the promise she had made decades earlier while watching her father's wrongful arrest to change the system from within, using institutional authority to protect those targeted by its time abuses. As she reviewed final preparation for Wilson's sentencing hearing, her phone chimed with a message from Maya Community Leadership, wants to establish scholarship in Eleanor's name for Oakwood Heights students pursuing law. Enforcement careers with justice focus. Need your input on criteria. The proposal represented exactly the sustainable change Eleanor had worked toward throughout her life, investing in future generations who would continue reform work beyond individual cases or careers. The Guardian investigation had exposed organized abuse of police authority against minority communities, but its lasting significance lay in the structural reforms, accountability mechanisms, and community empowerment initiatives developing the Rock Times Epochs nationwide in response. Justice required both accountability for past actions and prevention of future abuses, a process extending far beyond any single investigation, prosecution, or congressional hearing into generational commitments to constitutional protection for all citizens regardless of race, wealth, or political power. 7 months after Wilson's initial arrest, Naomi stood at the courtroom podium delivering victim impact testimony during his sentencing hearing. Behind her sat rows of Oakwood Heights residents whose experiences had built the case alongside representatives from similarly affected communities nationwide. The defendant's actions represent more than individual misconduct, she stated, addressing Judge Evelyn Richardson directly. They demonstrate systematic weaponization of police authority against citizens based on their race implemented through organized conspiracy over decades rather than isolated incidents. The harm extends beyond specific encounters to community trust in fundamental institutions, constitutional protections, and equal citizenship itself. Wilson sat impassively at the defense table, orange jumpsuit, replacing the uniform he had wielded as weapon and shield. His cooperation had expanded the investigation's scope while reducing his personal sentence, the classic prosecutorial trade-off prioritizing systemic exposure over maximum individual punishment. Judge Richardson's sentencing statement acknowledged this complexity. Mr. Wilson, your cooperation has provided valuable evidence regarding broader criminal conspiracies. However, this cooperation cannot erase the fundamental betrayal of public trust your actions represent. Law enforcement authority exists to protect all citizens, equally a sacred responsibility you deliberately corrupted for discriminatory purposes. Wilson received 12 years in federal prison, less than maximum penalties, but significant for a former officer who would serve his sentence in protected custody due to law enforcement background. More consequential than individual sentences were the structural reforms triggered by the Guardian investigation. 73 officers terminated across 27 departments, 34 police chiefs or commissioners resigned or removed, 14 prosecutors facing disciplinary proceedings for selective enforcement patterns, and 8 elected officials indicted for corruption related to Guardian operations. Every affected jurisdiction implemented enhanced oversight mechanisms, bias auditing procedures, and community accountability structures. Congressional hearings produced bipartisan support for the Law Enforcement Accountability and Community Trust Act, establishing national standards for departmental data collection, early intervention systems for identifying problematic officer patterns, civilian oversight requirements, and federal funding tied to reform implementation. Police academies nationwide adopted curriculum changes, emphasizing constitutional protections, community engagement, and ethical decision-making frameworks. Most significantly, Guardian-affected communities received both material and structural remedies. The civil settlement negotiated by Attorney Montgomery established a $470 million restitution fund for families directly harmed by Guardian operations with specific provisions for housing assistance business, revitalization, educational support, and mental health services. Community oversight boards received statutory authority, dedicated funding, and technical assistance from civil rights organizations. Naomi's professional trajectory reflected the investigation's impact. Promotion to Assistant Special Agent in charge of the FBI's expanded Civil Rights Division came with responsibility for implementing systemic reforms identified through the Guardian case. Her congressional testimony had established her as a leading voice on institutional accountability and community-centered law enforcement practices. Most meaningful, personally, was the Oakwood Heights Restoration Project, a community-led initiative transforming her grandmother's house into a combined civil rights education center, legal assistance office, and youth mentorship program. Returning to the property 3 months after Eleanor's passing, Naomi found volunteers painting exterior walls, landscaping, neglected gardens, and establishing computer stations for community access to legal resources. "We're calling it Eleanor's Place," Pastor Wallace explained, showing her architectural plans for expanded facilities. "Neighborhood hub for rights, education, advocacy training, and community building. Your grandmother's legacy in physical form. The transformation extended beyond physical spaces to institutional relationships." Officer Martinez's Independent Police Accountability Commission had implemented community-centered reforms throughout Detroit, recruiting diverse candidates from affected neighborhoods, establishing mentorship programs between veteran officers and community leaders, creating transparent complaint resolution processes with civilian oversight. Similar initiatives developed nationwide, informed by lessons from the Guardian investigation, and supported through dedicated federal funding. Maya Richardson's comprehensive reporting earned journalism's highest awards while establishing new protocols for investigating systematic civil rights violations, methods now taught in journalism schools nationwide. Attorney Montgomery expanded his civil rights practice into a national advocacy organization, addressing discriminatory policing through combined litigation policy reform and community empowerment strategies. Pastor Wallace's documentation system evolved into standardized community monitoring protocols adopted by oversight committees across America. The Guardian case transformed from criminal investigation into institutional reform movement, spanning legal, political, educational, and community dimensions. 18 months after Wilson's arrest, Naomi returned to Bethel AME Church for a different purpose, addressing the inaugural class of the Eleanor Carter Community Justice Fellowship. 20 high school students selected for intensive mentoring in legal advocacy, community organizing, and institutional reform strategies. "My grandmother believed meaningful change requires both accountability for past injustices and investment in future leadership," she explained to students, seated where congregants had once gathered to document Guardian harassment. "You represent that future leadership, young people committed to ensuring constitutional protections extend equally to all communities." During the fellowship orientation, Naomi shared the investigation's central lesson that justice requires both exposing individual misconduct and addressing systemic conditions enabling abuse. The students represented Oakwood Heights' transformation from systematically targeted community to empowered advocate for nationwide reform, their experiences informing policy development rather than remaining ignored by institutional responses. Most symbolic of this transformation was 16-year-old Desiree Jenkins, granddaughter of the custodian, who had first slipped Naomi information about the shield during her initial investigation. Agent Carter. How do we prevent future Guardian-type organizations from developing within systems meant to protect citizens? Desiree asked during the mentorship session. The question embodied the case's evolution from reactive investigation to proactive prevention. By creating transparent accountability structures, diverse representation within institutions, and most importantly, communities empowered with knowledge of their rights and mechanisms to enforce those rights when violated, Naomi explained. Abuse flourishes in shadows and isolation. Our responsibility is maintaining light and connection. That philosophy guided institutional reforms implemented nationwide, following the Guardian investigation, enhancing transparency requirements, strengthening oversight mechanisms, diversifying departmental leadership, and establishing direct communication channels between law enforcement agencies and historically marginalized communities. Police training incorporated lessons from Guardian operations, teaching officers to recognize and resist discriminatory practices while establishing clear reporting mechanisms for misconduct observations. Federal guidelines now required departments to implement early intervention systems identifying concerning behavioral patterns before escalation to organized abuse. Academic research examining Guardian recruitment tactics informed enhanced screening protocols for law enforcement candidates, identifying vulnerability factors for radicalization within departmental cultures. Technology facilitated community oversight through standardized complaint tracking systems, body camera accountability measures, and data transparency requirements, allowing independent analysis of enforcement patterns. The reforms represented institutional learning rather than merely individual punishment, addressing conditions that had allowed Guardian operations to develop undetected for decades, despite existing accountability structures. For Naomi personally, the case fulfilled multiple promises to her grandmother, who had maintained hope for institutional reform despite witnessing generations of resistance, to her father, whose wrongful arrest had inspired her career path, and to herself, as a 12-year-old girl, watching helplessly as systems meant to protect citizens were weaponized against her family based solely on race. The Guardian investigation demonstrated both institutional capacity for self-correction when properly motivated and community resilience in maintaining documentation despite official dismissal. When Naomi received invitations to lead FBI training sessions on civil rights enforcement, she insisted community representatives participate as equal presenters rather than passive subjects, instituting structural recognition that effective reform required expertise from those directly affected by abuses rather than merely those professionally trained to address them. This partnership approach characterized post-Guardian accountability, nationwide community advisory boards, with substantive authority civilian oversight committees, with investigative powers and transparency requirements, allowing independent verification of reform implementation. 2 years after Wilson's initial arrest, Naomi returned to Oakwood Heights for Eleanor's Place dedication ceremony. The renovated community center featured historical exhibits documenting both Guardian operations and community resistance legal assistance offices, providing representation for civil rights claims, educational facilities hosting rights awareness workshops, and gathering spaces for neighborhood organizations previously lacking institutional support. Most meaningful was the youth development program training future community leaders in advocacy strategies, institutional navigation, and reform implementation, creating generational capacity for maintaining accountability beyond immediate provent. Case resolution. During the dedication ceremony attended by residents, officials, and media representatives, Naomi acknowledged both institutional failures that had allowed Guardian operations and community persistence that had ultimately exposed their prustenance activities. True justice requires both accountability for past wrongs and transformation preventing future abuses, she concluded, standing before Eleanor's portrait in the center's main hall. This facility represents that transformation, converting spaces once characterized by fear into resources for empowerment, education, and continued vigilance against civil rights violations. The ceremony concluded with announcement of federal funding for similar centers in Guardian-affected communities nationwide, institutional recognition that sustainable reform required ongoing community investment rather than merely punishing individual misconduct. As attendees transitioned to community celebration featuring local artists, food vendors, and youth performances, Naomi encountered a young patrol officer recently graduated from the academy and assigned to Oakwood Heights under reformed deployment practices. Agent Carter I joined the department because of this case. Officer Tiana Williams explained, extending her hand. Wanted to be part of rebuilding trust between law enforcement and communities historically targeted for harassment rather than protection. Her presence embodied the Guardian investigation's most significant outcome, inspiring new generation of officers committed to constitutional policing principles and equitable protection regardless of race, wealth, or political seas, were Copaju.com. Influence. Their conversation represented the case's evolutionary impact, transforming from reactive investigation, addressing past abuses, into proactive framework, preventing future violations through combined institutional reform and community empowerment. The Guardian conspiracy had weaponized police authority against citizens based on race. Its exposure now strengthened protections for those same communities through enhanced accountability structures, diversified institutional leadership, and empowered civilian oversight. For Naomi personally, The case journey from confrontation to transformation fulfilled her professional mission while honoring familial legacy. The FBI commendation ceremony scheduled the following month would officially recognize her investigative achievements, but watching Oakwood Heights residents freely gathering without fear of targeted enforcement represented more meaningful validation, constitutional protections, finally extending equally to communities historically denied their full protection. As celebration continued around Eleanor's place, Naomi recognized the Guardian case's ultimate lesson that justice requires not merely removing individual abusers, but transforming systems that enabled their operation, creating sustainable accountability rather than temporary correction. The confrontation that began with Wilson's gun aimed at a black FBI agent had evolved into nationwide reckoning with discriminatory policing practices, producing institutional reforms, community empowerment initiatives, and leadership development programs, ensuring protection extended equally to all citizens, regardless of race, fulfilling America's constitutional promise, rather than merely punishing its violation. Have you ever wondered what you would do if faced with injustice like Naomi Carter? But you have the courage to stand up against a corrupt system, even at personal risk? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments section below. If this story of courage, justice, and transformation resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that shine a light on important social issues. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear that one person really can make a difference in fighting systemic injustice. Thank you for joining me today, and remember, real change happens when brave individuals refuse to look away from uncomfortable truths. Naomi Carter's journey illustrates powerful truths about justice and institutional change. First, it demonstrates that systems designed to protect can be weaponized against the vulnerable when oversight fails and bias goes unchallenged. The Guardian network thrived because accountability structures were compromised and community complaints dismissed as isolated incidents rather than recognized as patterns of abuse. Second, the story reveals that meaningful change requires both individual courage and collective action. Naomi's willingness to confront injustice was essential, but transformation only occurred when communities documented abuses, journalists investigated patterns, attorneys pursued remedies, and reform-minded insiders provided crucial evidence. Third, we learn that true justice extends beyond punishing perpetrators to healing communities and reforming systems. The establishment of Eleanor's Place oversight commissions and educational programs represents sustainable change rather than temporary correction. Perhaps most importantly, Naomi's story teaches us that confronting systemic racism requires institutional transformation guided by those most affected by its harms. When marginalized communities gain representation in reform processes, accountability mechanisms and leadership development protection extends equally to all citizens. Finally, this narrative reminds us that the journey from confrontation to transformation is neither quick nor easy, but persistent pursuit of justice creates ripples, affecting lives across generations, fulfilling America's constitutional promise, rather than merely acknowledging its violation. What would you do if faced with systemic injustice in your community? Would you have the courage to stand up like Naomi, even when the cost feels overwhelming? I'd love to know if you've ever witnessed discrimination and how you responded. Share your experiences in the comments below. If Naomi's story of courage against racist institutions inspired you, please hit that like button to help more people discover this important narrative. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that illuminate social justice issues too often left in darkness. And if you know someone struggling to find hope in their fight against discrimination, share this video as a reminder that one person's courage can spark nationwide change. Thank you for joining me today on this journey through darkness into transformation. Remember, in the words of Eleanor Carter, to feel the fear, then do what needs doing anyway.